Hi, Stacia. Welcome to the
Hello,
show.
John. I'm
Oh,
happy to be here.
well, I'm happy to have you. Where are you located exactly right now?
I'm in Eastern Washington. My
Washington State.
husband and I moved here, and we had our kids here, and this is home now.
Okay, great, great. You've written two books by what I can see. One's called The Missing Girl. The other one is called Jessa is Back. Very cool covers to those books. And we're going to get to them for sure. But I'd like to know a little bit more about you and how you got to the point where you wrote these books and, what makes you tick and a little bit of backstory would be nice.
All right. Well, I'm a research scientist by training, a teacher as well, educator, and I had a lot of interest in the creepy crawly animals, so I'm a biologist at heart, and we uh, we found that this made a wonderful career option for us. It gave us a lot of freedom, and it also let us do things that we enjoy. So we've been happy with that. But I retired from teaching and doing research, and at that time I found I could write, and it was kind of a discovery for me.
Hmm,
I my mother was a writer of children's books,
okay.
and I just had no idea where plot came from. I had written lots of letters, I had written reports and scientific uh, journal articles, but I had not written anything that involved plot and development of character and that sort of thing. But it turned out that it just grew out of daydreams and it came naturally
Wow, cool. And you discovered this of yourself at after you retired.
after I retired. Yes.
Okay. Wow, that's quite something. So let's start with your first book, The
The missing
Missing.
girl, Jessa, she receives terrible information. She overhears the sheriff telling her neighbor that her family has been killed in a car crash. And she hears them talking about her being an orphan and foster care. And her own father was an orphan, and he had terrible experiences with his foster care. So she's frightened of that. She runs away with her dog, and she gets on her bicycle and bikes away to her grandfather's farm. Her grandfather was killed in the accident as well. So this is an abandoned farm. She goes to a hollow tree that she knows about, and she essentially takes this hideout and makes it a temporary home. She scrounges food from the garden and goes into the house for some supplies she needs, but she mainly sticks to the forest, and so she avoids detection. And meanwhile, the town, shocked by the accident, but then even more threatened by her disappearance, becomes paranoid. And they break apart along racial lines. They begin to blame the black members of the population for somehow kidnapping her or making away with her. And so you have a breakdown in the truce that normally allows people to get along in each in their roles. And this is the 1950s. I should have said that at first. So in the 1950s, this is before the civil rights changes were imposed on the South. The civil Brown versus Board of Education has been passed, but everybody's able to ignore it for a while. And yet it's undermining their sense of security in the white supremacy that operates in the rural South. So the story unfolds as the effort by Jessa
Mhm.
to self-sufficiency, care for herself and her dog. And then she is discovered by relatives, and she makes herself known to them because she discovers that they are related to her, and she's fascinated by that. And her situation at the farm is deteriorating. It's cold, it's snowing, and she can't make a fire, and she can't
Mm.
keep on caring for herself and her dog. So she joins with this family that she didn't know existed, and they take her back to the town where she has to face the people that have been pretty much put out by the fact that she's fine, and they thought she was dead, and they have been undergoing a lot of trauma uh, about her situation, and now she's perfectly fine, and they're somewhat resistant to the idea that she was okay all that time
Okay.
because they they didn't want it to be that way. But she wants to do something that her father had embraced. He was on the school board. Her parents operated the music shop in town, and he was an advocate of music education. So he tried to get the school to adopt education of instrumental training in the grade schools, in the high school. And they did it only for the white school.
Okay.
And that's the thrust of her effort is to get it adopted into the black school as well. And she makes a considerable effort meeting with the school board to make some progress on this. But that gets her into the second book. So the second book is a kind of a sequel, but Jessa has gone with this family to Portland, Oregon, and finished out the school year there. And while she's there, she makes the acquaintance of a black girl who is also a musician. She plays the flute as well. And so Jessa and this girl become close friends, and Jessa almost would love to take her back to Tennessee to visit. But when she gets back to Tennessee to undergo the custody hearings, she realizes that the Jim Crow laws would keep her apart from this friend. She would never have been able to even make the acquaintance of this girl if they'd lived in the same town because the segregation is so severe. And she is a staunch advocate of interracial friendships. She wants to encourage those among the people she knows in her own town because there's lots of opportunities for that, but not easy opportunities. In every case, there are barriers. So this is a view of the 1950s, and I wanted to explain this to readers just as I wanted to explain it to our own children because they were disbelieving when we told them about the separate water fountains, the separate restrooms, the segregation on buses. They couldn't believe it. They rejected it. It didn't make any sense to them at all. Growing up in the Northwest, they had not experienced anything like that. And so I thought, well, the country is idealizing the 1950s, this wonderful period when everyone had a house in suburbia and the women stayed home and watched soap operas and everybody was happy and fulfilled, so called. It wasn't that way. There's a lot of problems with the 1950s, and there's a lot of problems today that have parallels with the
Yes.
1950s.
Yes.
And so I thought just letting people see the nitty gritty of what it was like in the 1950s would allow them to reevaluate what's going on now and the claims that are being made about white supremacy. They should be able to see that these are terrible, terrible ways of inflicting unjust actions on some
Definitely.
portions of the population.
Absolutely. Wow. You know, I didn't really examine your website too much. I just found it and I bookmarked it for later research. And judging by the book covers, I never would have guessed that this would have been the topic. And I'm really enjoying your description of it. I am 67 and I've lived in Canada my entire life. We came to Canada as Hungarian refugees. So my parents went through the war and, you know, the revolution in 56. And so my parents didn't really know much about what was going on in the southern states. But in 1965 is when I became woke. Of course, I didn't call myself that. And I've been curious about that term woke as it's being used a lot in these days and where it came from. And my understanding is it was from the Black community around the civil rights movement and even before that in the 1940s, but it's specifically about bringing to light the subject of racial segregation being a bad thing. Well, of course it is. Of course it is.
Of course it is.
And when I was 7, I saw the those iconic images on the television of police beating up black people and the dogs tearing at their pant legs or whatever. I didn't understand. I asked my father what that's about. And the moment he explained to me, that's it. I've never been the same since then. I'm
Mhm.
totally against bigotry of all sorts. Hmm.
Yeah.
I've got a lot
Well,
of questions.
that's the kind of experience that Jessa had.
Oh yeah,
It was waking up to what was around her. But if you're born into this society, it's harder to see it than if you're an outsider
yeah,
from Hungary or
yeah.
Canada. And so it took her just this friendship to expose the terrible aspects of her society.
Yeah.
And she spends the rest of the book trying to reverse that.
Okay, so that's 2 books. Are you planning to write more? Is this going to be a series?
I may write a third. I've got an outline of it,
Yeah.
and it would be the Black friend and Jessa coming back to the town in 5 years after a lot of these civil rights changes have been enacted.
Mm-hmm.
So it would follow up on this topic.
Yeah. Well, you said the 50s are not what people think it is. It was referred to in America as the golden age of economic expansion. Uh, for
Well,
some people, for
after
some people,
World
it was
War
great.
II,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was great if you were white male.
That's right.
That's what you had to be. If
That's
you
right.
were black, it was not great.
No.
The discrimination was worse than even before the war.
Yeah.
Everybody was being forced back into roles that were designed for suburbia
Yeah.
to be perfect. And for women it was terrible because if you wanted to do something different, your options were very limited
Hmm.
and the role models just weren't there.
It'd be interesting to see this story develop into going into the 60s. And you say 5 years later, your third book is going to be
Yeah,
5 years later.
that
So
would be about 1960.
okay, because then with Kennedy and then the Civil Rights Act, I think in '64 it was, and then the teenagers are all protesting things in universities, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to understand for those of us who lived through it, and I lived
Hmm.
through it from my recollection of early '60s onwards. It makes
Yeah.
sense to me. Wow. May I ask you why you chose fiction over simply just writing about racial segregation in the United States? Just write another book on what you think about it. Obviously, you don't like it. So, what made you
Uh,
write fiction?
Fiction is just came naturally, and I love the characters. I fell in love with the characters.
Oh, yeah.
I lived the story as I was writing it, and it was for me a wonderful experience.
Yeah, of course. I agree. Are you in this book somehow, some character you put yourself in, or you can relate to some character? Are you perhaps part of
I,
this girl's life?
I'm probably Jessa as close. Sometimes I'm Jessa's new adopted sister. Sometimes I'm other characters,
Yeah.
but I know all of these people. I know them quite well, and
Hmm.
Jess is a very stubborn person, and so am I.
Okay.
So
Cool.
that
Cool. What about your family? What do they think of you in your retirement writing these stories?
uh, they it's been a discovery for them. They didn't expect it, but they have been very happy with it. My mother was a writer, as I said,
Yeah.
and so and our daughter is a poet. So we have the potential. My husband writes. We have potential to share in this way. It's another way of educating, I think,
Ah, wonderful.
and I wanted to reach out.
Yeah. What was the writing experience like for you with your first book? You sat down in front of, I guess, a computer and you started to write. Is that how it worked out? Or did you write an
I wrote it.
outline?
I
How?
wrote in a notebook,
Okay.
a spiral-bound notebook,
Okay.
and that I've still got those notebooks. They started the book out, and it at that time was the daydream of Jessa's self-sufficiency experiment,
Hmm.
going into the forest. But then I began to realize that this was an opportunity to, and the town people are another character in the book. They are very diverse, and they tran transmit many of the lessons that I think need to be shown about the 1950s by using these townspeople. So I enjoyed every one of them.
Hmm.
It was a pleasure
Yeah.
to get to know them.
When did you write your first book? What year was that?
I guess I began about almost 10 years ago now,
Oh, I see.
and it was a gradual evolution to come to two books. And at one point, I thought perhaps they would be middle grade books because of the age of the protagonist.
Hmm.
But it's definitely dealing with adult issues,
It is.
just as To Kill a Mockingbird does.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of interest, and the men who've read it have found it very intriguing, and they've been captivated by it.
Yeah.
So it's not just for girls and women.
No, no, not by the sounds of it. No, I mean, absolutely. I was surprised that the twists the story turned when you were describing. Oh, oh, really? Is that where we're going with this? Fascinating stuff. So, when did you finish writing your second book? I'm going somewhere with this. What was the year that you finished writing your second book?
I think 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay. So between the initial writing with your spiral notebook to two
I
years
did. I
ago.
Yeah, I did get to a computer
Right.
eventually.
But you went through, you experienced the same things that all of us have experienced over the last 10 years. And you mentioned something about some people wanting to think about that time period of 50s as a so great, and let's go back to it. I don't want to talk politics, especially this in this show. But there are things happening in your country where people are wanting to go back to something. I don't know what they're talking about, and I suspect that they're talking about the 50s. And so I think you alluded to that. How,
Yes,
without getting too political, how do you feel about the social climate of people wanting to go back rather than, go forward?
it's ignorance. It's based on ignorance and the whole idea that we're supposed to not uh, be offending our young people by telling them their own history. I think that that's a big mistake. I think that we've got to educate people so that they won't repeat their own errors.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of potential for that right now.
for sure, for sure. The book covers are fascinating. They look hand painted, hand drawn. Who did them?
I didn't.
You did them. Wonderful.
Yes.
Isn't that nice? Well, besides saving yourself some money, I mean, it's just so unique and so nice.
Well, I figured I would be able to do it better than anybody just told the story and given a palette. I think that I really felt I had an idea of what the stories were about. So,
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm a good storyteller, but I draw like a 10-year-old, so I couldn't do that.
oh, 10-year-olds are very capable.
Music was my thing and telling stories. Now, just touching briefly on that, our time, the sign of the times. Would your would your book be banned in certain places because of the subject matter, you think?
It's possible, quite possible. I let
Crazy.
some of the individuals in the town use the N word, and they are definitely harshly bigoted.
Yeah.
And that's the threat that everyone existed under in these circumstances.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
threat that the white supremacy thing would happen, the cross burning would happen, and that definitely existed in the 1950s. It existed
Absolutely.
in the 1960s, so we're not out of it yet.
Absolutely not. Yeah, for sure. There's some serious problems there too. And don't think Canada is immune to that. I mean, we went through a different thing here in Nova Scotia. There's something called Africville, which the government didn't treat the black community very well in the 50s. So we have our stories too. And do you touch upon the First Nations people? Do you talk about that at all? Or how do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm living out west now. I came from Tennessee. In Tennessee, the Cherokee were just a memory, just an idealized memory, because they were all gone. Out
Hmm.
here, we have Native Americans. They have reservations, and I think that they've been terribly treated.
Hmm.
I think it's the second, maybe it was the primary abuse that this country's been responsible for,
Hmm.
the slavery and the abolishment of so many Native American tribes.
I don't generally talk about my books. The last one I wrote 2 years ago was fiction. I write fiction, and it addressed the subject of bigotry, and
Mm,
I went pretty deep with that. But it's all fiction, just characters.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's an effective way to
yeah,
convey the information.
yeah. Hmm. If only bigots read it, though. I don't know.
Yes, right.
Oh, what a world we live in. So, your third book, when do you think that you are going to be sending your draft in for editing on that one?
Oh, I would give myself a year.
A year. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. And I guess you're enjoying your retirement then doing this.
I am enjoying the retirement. We have a farm. We have animals. In
Oh,
addition to our dogs, we have goats, chickens, ducks, and we have hoop houses and a vineyard.
wow,
So
great. Great. My father bought a farm later in life and I worked on it and he had goats and I took care of the goats and chickens. So yeah, I'm right with you there. I don't have a farm. I have a hobby farm that I grow my vegetables in. That's about it. And I got 3 dogs, but. And we can have chickens. We're zoned for having chickens if we want, but I don't think I want
mighty
to.
good eggs, mighty good eggs.
Yeah, I'm not really into animal husbandry. I don't think I'd be good at that, but I do grow vegetables very well. Yeah, so I like
Good for
that.
you.
That's my thing.
The website is Lost and Found in Tennessee. As I said, I grew up in Tennessee. This is much of what I remember growing up in the 1940s and 50s. So I was able to write this as a immersion in the history of the town that I knew and the place that I knew and the people that I knew. And I think that the books will deliver. They will entertain and they will educate. And that's my intention.
Good. I'm sure they will. How's sales for you, by the way?
Well, it was just released this week.
The
So
second one, but the first one was released earlier. What?
no, they were released together.
Oh, they were. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I guess we'll find out.
I would say that there's lots of music in these books. So anyone who loves music will find not only the Nashville music, but the
Wow.
kinds of music that orchestras and choruses sing. So there's a lot of that.
What do you mean by music? Like you're talking about bands or existing artists at the time, so you bring in a little bit of reality as well?
Well, I brought in a little bit of reality in that the Oregon family, Jessa takes them to the Grand Ole Opry, so they
Yeah.
experience that. They contrast that with the blues on the streets in Nashville, and they have music education as one of the focuses of the plot. Uh, Jess's father, as I said, was an orphan, but his family played the hammer dulcimer, and so he wanted to make music education
Yeah.
in the town so that it was available to everyone. He felt it was very important.
So do you want to give a little elevator pitch for these two books and tell people where it's available and why they should consider buying it?
These two books, they go together. They're definitely a set, and they follow a timeline that I think is important for people to acquaint themselves with just nowadays because of the challenges that we face socially and the need to educate ourselves about the past. So I think that these two books bring it alive. That was my ambition, to make it something that my children and anyone else who was interested in that period could immerse themselves in the thinking of the time and to better understand what's going on today.
Okay. You know, when you finish your third book and you want to talk about it some more,
All right.
you look me up and we'll have you back on the show. I'd love to have
All
repeat
right. All
guests.
right.
Absolutely. All right.
That would be delightful.
Well, all my best to you and your family and to your life out there as you retire and write books and enjoy your life. I'm really glad that I
Thank you
met
very
you.
much.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
You take
Carry
care.
on.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, and if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then I invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment if you wish. And if you are an author, I would sure love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing, and remember to be kind to one another.